You know how when you take one of your pictures, you capture something forever, just the way it is? Stories do that too. So when we die, we turn into stories. And every time someone tells one of those stories, it's like we're still here for them. We're all stories in the end.
You might recall that while I was avoiding the final edit of the behemoth hour-long episode on The Shining, I made a short bonus episode all about the haunting of Hill House. Hill House was a simple story about trauma and loss and how those things can bring a family together or tear a family apart. But The Haunting of Bly Manor, the second series in a TV show with a different title and index on Netflix, which makes my compulsive need for things to be ordered profoundly fun, is more complicated. It's about self-identity, toxic relationships, and the overwhelming pain that comes from truly loving someone. So this episode, we're taking a deep dive into The Haunting of Bly Manor to discuss loss, pain, sadness, grief, and if it all gets a bit too heavy, we'll play Spot the Hidden Ghost, or maybe I'll just go off on a tangent about Pathologic 2, because it's my show, Brian. I get to choose. Oh, okay, fine. We just cut to titles and see if I care. Spoilers. Yeah, spoiler warning. We do this every time, but I'm serious this time. This will spoil. Let me get closer here. This will spoil the Bly Manor TV show. You cannot put the cat back in the bottle. This is your warning. This is spoilers, okay? So normally I do a much more intricate rundown of the plot of the media in question to help outline the elements of the text that we're going to be discussing and contextualize the points I make. But this is a 9-episode series, and if the timeline in Premiere gets over an hour long, my computer starts to... well, I don't know how to describe it. It sounds like a Henry Hoover wailing over a profound loss. Maybe he's the last of his species. Maybe he killed them all. So we're going to really lightly summarize the plot. The Haunting of Bly Manor is a very loose adaptation of Henry James's The Turn of the Screw. And it follows Danny Clayton as she takes up the mantle of au pair at Bly Manor to 2 children, following the death of their previous governess. Unbeknownst to Danny though, the house is chock full to the rafters with ghosts, most notably the lingering spirits of previous governess Miss Jessel and valet to the kids' uncle Peter Quinn, who were in a less than healthy relationship before they both got offed. The kids can see these 2 ghosts and in fact are being groomed by them to act as their afterlife Uber drivers to get them out of the manor's grounds. Danny, along with the housekeeper Mrs. Gross, cook Owen and gardener Jamie, take care of the kids as things get weirder and weirder, culminating in the ghost of Quint trying to enact his plan to take over the kids and bounce with Jessel. Things go awry, however, and as Gross is killed and the kid's emotionally distant uncle / baby daddy is almost killed, the spirit of Viola tries to take Flora. Viola is the first ghost to take up residence at Bly and is the reason most of these ghosts are here in the first place, let alone the thing that's actually keeping them here and stopping them from moving on. As Viola is about to take Flora for a tour of the bottom of the lake, Danny invites the spirit of Viola into herself, and as such Flora is spared. Danny spends the next few years of her life happy and very much in love with her partner Jamie, but with the presence of Viola inside her and biding her time to take over. In the end, Danny, or Viola, returns to Bly Manor and returns to the lake to rest, leaving Jamie, Owen, and the Wingraves to live on without her. I'm not crying, you're crying. There are a number of themes running through the series, but I want to focus on 2 of them in particular: reflections and the notion of self-identity, and love and pain. One of the main themes of the series, and prevalent from as early as Danny's first few scenes, is the idea of self-identity, self-image, and reflections. Across the series, there are a few characters that all have to engage with the idea of confronting who they really are, manifested as ghosts. However, in the 2 clearest examples of this, the ghosts are, like Hill House, only visual metaphors. Principal protagonist Danny, almost from the very get-go, is established as being stalked by something that appears in her reflection, standing behind her. Anime villain John Lennon appears so routinely that Danny has to cover all of the mirrors in her apartment. And that's because the ghost is there every time she looks in the mirror. Because the ghost exists as a part of how she sees herself. Danny's childhood friend, turned boyfriend, turned fiancé, turned tragic backstory was killed in a road traffic accident mere moments after she called off their engagement. Danny is a gay woman, and although we see a brief glimpse of this being uncovered or realized. The story instead shows us not the anguish as she realizes who she really is, but the overwhelming pressure placed on her by everyone else to follow the path set out for her. We see in maybe the darkest engagement speech I've heard in quite a while, that Edmund wore Danny down after a long period of attrition. You know, romance.
And she turned me down. She says, we're too young. And so I said, when is old enough? And well, over the years, I kept asking and asking. Now, we're still pretty young, but I think we are old enough to know what we want. And what I want is to be the man that gets to be with this girl, this beautiful, amazing girl for the rest of our lives. Danielle, thank you for daring me to do it. Can't wait.
Following his death, Danny's reflection is not just her physical being, but the guilt she feels over placing her needs above Edmund's and getting him killed. The betrayal of all those members of his family that openly accepted her, and her own sexuality. Now, there are people who are going to be infinitely better equipped to talk about the effect of a person's sexuality and having to keep that hidden, especially in small town America in the 80s, and its effect on how a person sees themselves. But I don't think it's a mistake that the show puts such a heavy emphasis on the guilt and the shame Danny feels. Edmund's death is something that Danny blames herself for, and she carries his ghost with her across the pond to jolly old Washington. His appearance is never inherently threatening because Danny never saw him as a threat. Danny has to navigate moving forward while carrying the guilt of hurting him and the shame of betraying his family. This is in spite of the fact that it is not Danny's fault. I have it on good authority that coming out is not easy, and she is in no way responsible for Eddie's death. Danny's journey to America is her attempt to literally run away from her problems, to leave the pain and angst behind and drop her into a new place. But he follows her, because Eddie exists as a reflection of her feelings to his death. She doesn't mourn Eddie. She doesn't miss him or celebrate his life, because the life that was Eddie's has been smothered by this version that contains almost zero of Eddie and all of Danny's feelings on the guilt she feels she is supposed to feel. It's not a coincidence that every time she feels comfortable or, heaven forbid, starts to engage in a little romance, Eddie is there. And despite the fact he doesn't do anything, Danny starts as though she's Matthew Lillard and the Juggernaut's taken a swing at her. That's a 13 Ghosts reference. I don't know why I made that. I've been thinking a lot about Castle Pictures lately. Another example of a person's self-perception tormenting them is Henry. Henry carries baggage. I mean, he has to, his valet can't do it for him anymore. Henry is the uncle to Flora and Miles. Well, no, he's the father of Flora, following a long-standing affair with his brother's wife, Charlotte. This isn't just a fling, but seemingly a genuine romantic relationship, where the pair do seem to actually love each other. Although, you know, they're still cheating on clueless Dominic. After the affair is discovered, the Wingraves head off to India to sort their marriage out, where they die. Henry gets the call to say they've died and then has to make that call to Bly Manor. From here, Henry keeps the kids at arm's distance, refusing to attend Bly and only speaking with the kids by crank calling the house just to hear his secret daughter answer the phone. He turns to drink and at night is tormented by a projection of the sort of person his brother accused him of being. Henry's personal ghost doesn't come from looking in the mirror. It comes from being the very person he is, and having the spectre of how his brother perceived him at the end of his life following him. The sudden death of Dominic and Charlotte means Henry never got to earn trust back or change his brother's mind. Instead, after a lifetime of being a presumably relatively happy family, it was at their relationship's lowest point that they were gone forever. Evil Henry seemingly resides in Dominic's old office, and the night the two Henrys met was the night of the Wingraves accident. Henry is drowning in guilt and shame, and he is routinely tormented by the greasy fuckboy shade of himself that drags him through all his worst memories every night over a nice scotch. That Henry cedes control to evil Henry, enabling him to dictate which memories they revisit over and over, signifies how Henry really does feel that his brother's perception of him is the one in charge, is the real Henry, and he is but a reflection of the person he thinks he was. After, 2 years of torture, Henry's ghost is presumably exercised by the act of pushing himself to do the one thing he's been unable to do: go back to Bly. This is because the phone line is dead and he fears something bad has happened, but we also see time and time again that Henry is contacted to say that something bad has happened at Bly and neglects to attend. Henry simply gets to a point where either he is who he wants to be, a good person who's done some truly shitty things, or he's the version of himself that taunts him every night, the version his brother thought he was, and he has nothing to lose. But Henry chooses to go back to Bly. We don't see evil Henry again, but we can assume that, like Danny, every now and then as he brings up his nephew and, niece, that somewhere in the room, Stalking in the background of the mirror, evil Henry is still there. Not gone, but being whittled away, piece by piece. The other major instance of self-identity is less a character's development, but rather the concept of the ghosts themselves. Viola Willoughby died at Bly Manor after fighting off a terminal illness for years.
But it is not good news. She has the lung.
Yeah, Doc, she's supposed to have 2 of them. Due to unresounding stubbornness, she refuses to move on, remaining at Bly bound within the trunk filled with her prized possessions, ready for her daughter to inherit them. When it is in fact her sister that gets into the trunk, Viola responds erratically. Fearing the trunk is cursed, Viola's husband tosses it into the lake before they leave Bly forever, condemning Viola's spirit to a watery grave from whence she would rise and walk to her bedroom to find her daughter, and then walk back again when she failed. And woe behold anyone who stood in her way. Now, we could do the YouTube thing and try and agonise over the proposed science of how ghosts work in the Flanagan cinematic universe, but that's not the point. It doesn't matter where the trunk is now, or that she was in the trunk, but once it was dunked, she wasn't anymore. The point is that when Viola takes her finest dresses and jewellery and places it in the trunk, it is after 5 years of agony and pain, stalking around the house but never being able to so much as cuddle her own daughter. When she places those things in the chest, Viola is taking those parts of her life, the things from before, those parts of herself, and storing them away, choosing to pass those on to her daughter. Viola readies herself to let go by admitting that she would rather pass on the finery, the parties, and the stories of the fearsome and witty Lady of Bly than the echo of herself that she has become. She chooses her legacy, the version of herself she wants her daughter to hold on to as her mum for the rest of her life. Even after her sister kills her, she doesn't seek to wreak vengeance, she simply waits. She is within the trunk in as much as when her daughter would open it and see this amazing collection of things that the Lady of Bly left her, she will always carry the best version of her mother with her, even if she never got to meet her. Then Perdita opens the trunk. This doesn't turn Viola evil, it simply reduces what the chest represented to Viola and her husband to a box of valuables. In opening it in the dead of night to find the riches she needs to live the lifestyle she always wanted, Perdita contorts the notion of legacy into one of capital. Over time, as she stalks the ground and collects her dark YMCA, Viola loses her face. Her eyes, her features, the visual representation of her identity. The same fate befalls the other ghosts. The plague doctor, the priest, the child, the soldier. They lose their ability to communicate as their mouths disappear. Over time, they're worn away. Not because of some kind of ghost science, but because over long periods, people are lost to time. How many ghost hunting shows or documentaries have you seen when someone tells the story of how someone died in this room, or a body was found in the cellar? In a house where a terrible murder has happened and 3 people were killed, for example, what do those 3 people look like? How do they wear their hair? What clothes did they wear? How did they smile? The ghosts lose their features because no one was left to remember what those features were. It doesn't matter how they looked because we are all relative to those who know us and experience us, and when these ghosts live in absolute isolation, they don't need features. No one can hear them talk or cry or scream, so they don't need mouths. Time just wears away the memory of us until we are just a man, a woman, a soldier, a child. That's what Peter's so scared of. Peter came from hell as a child, and now he has someone who sees him as valuable for who he is, as more than just what he can physically provide. Though yes, Peter is a controlling, jealous manipulator who consumes Jessel, both metaphorically and then as close to literally as you can get without being, I don't know, Kirby or the last Henry who. And Peter wants to hold on to that. He doesn't want to be alone and forgotten. We've seen where Peter goes when he's alone, and again, although his methods are bad, it's hard to not at least sympathise with how he got to this point. Jessel and Peter are remembered. They are loved and feared by those still at Bly, but no one remembers Viola. And what need has a person completely and totally alone of a face that distinguishes who she is? Time makes blank faces of us all. Jesus, that got depressing. Let's do a ghost hunt. The final big reveal of the show is that the storyteller from the show's framing device is Jamie. having grown older and now in attendance at the wedding of young Flora. The story she is telling is the forgotten story of the kid's past, albeit with names changed or switched around. We close out the series on, I would argue, the point of the show. See, Hill House was all about trauma. A massive, vacuous black hole of pain that happened in a confused and hectic night as kids. And in the absence of concrete information on what happened, each of the Crane kids had to build themselves into adults harboring shapeless, non-understandable trauma. But Bly Manor is not about how families are built or broken by trauma, but how people can so easily drown in the pain of loss, and how important it is to remember that people, like moonflowers, bloom so infrequently and for such a short time, and yet it is the memory of the flower, the legacy and stories we tell each other, and the short time we have spent in the presence of that blooming that we must hold on to. Danny and Henry both lost. One a lover and brother, and the other a best friend, and both lost them in the face of guilt and shame, betrayal and infidelity, or just breaking someone's heart because they couldn't deny who they were anymore. And as a result, the ghosts of those relationships became twisted and wrong. Evil Henry mocked, barbed, and hurt Henry because that's what Henry felt he deserved. Danny felt the ever-present watching eyes of her fiancé, glowing like the headlights of an approaching truck, because she called off the marriage just before he died. Both prevented themselves from grieving these people and celebrating their lives because the stories worth telling of those people, those relationships, those blooms, became overshadowed by the pain and the shame associated with their deaths. Viola recognizes, after an honest chat with #BestSisterEverPerdator, that the legacy she was passing on to her child, the memories her daughter would inherit, were increasingly becoming hollow and bitter as her relentless struggle against death made her hollow and bitter. Viola chose to leave a better legacy, lock away that amazing, intelligent, and ruthless person she had been, and seal it away for her daughter to find in the future. Mrs. Gross may well have regrets about the things she failed to do before her passing, but because she completely and totally allowed herself to exist within the moments she did have with Owen, her memories are places she is, for the most part, quite happy to remain, and the legacy of their relationship lives on in the tacky name of a fine dining restaurant in New Orleans, dead but never gone. To contrast this, Peter Quint, a man who came from a household in which his father sexually abused him and his mother did nothing to prevent it, is so hateful of his day-to-day life and the wealthy and privileged people around him that he is unable to enjoy anything in the moment. He goes on to perpetuate the cycle of abuse, not sexual, but he does kill Miss Jessel. And even having her with him forever isn't enough. He needs to keep moving forward. Jamie loses Danny. But she has Danny for a long time before then, and she will continue to have her for a long time after. The dread of Viola's approaching, the ticking of the clock for Danny is, sure, a supernatural possession in progress, but it's the same ticking clock we all have in our relationships. To love someone is to admit that the great pain that follows losing them is worth it, and we all know that an end, if not the end, is coming at any moment, and it is a pain that Jamie, with her clear understanding of why she prefers plants to people, chooses to undertake. We carry those we love with us, and it fucking hurts to do so, but the pain is worth it for the moments we get, one day at a time. And there is a character who perfectly understands this. In his fireside obituary, Owen acknowledges the pain and the burden of caring for his mum in her elderly, Alzheimer's-afflicted state, but he also holds on to those memories that were specific to her. Not the generic positive memories people would mention at the funeral, but the actual, genuine moments that made Owen's mum a person. An actual living being that affected the people around her. She lives in Owen, and he will carry her always. We leave echoes of ourselves throughout our lives, through the people we meet, the conversations that we have, the things we do. But a person could never be fully reconstructed by collating all of those echoes and combining them. There is something inherent to us that is once in a lifetime, the rare blooming of a moonflower. The point is not to perfectly etch yourself into the world so that you live forever, but to seize enough moments in your life that when you lose someone, that person exists within you, a part of you. Throughout the series, we see Miles get repeatedly possessed by Quint. His mannerisms change, the way he talks changes, and he becomes manipulative and pretty creepy. But is he possessed? Or rather, what is the difference between the spirit of a person possessing a child, or that child emulating the influences exerted over them by the people in their lives? When a child in their impressionable state of being starts to imitate the behaviors or language of an adult, Is that not a form of spiritual possession? When we are stalked by the ghosts of our past, to what extent are we simply being possessed by our own simulations of the feelings that the past impressed upon us, either good or bad? There is something so immediately understandable and yet completely incomprehensible to the quality of the effect people have on each other, and what those effects mean after that person is lost. The Haunting of Bly Manor has us examine people haunted by their guilt, their shame, facing up to their passivity, the choices they've made, or how they've carried themselves. But in the end, it tells us, in no uncertain terms, that every flower that blooms stays with us. And it's worth it.